We were hoping for something a little more relatable for the kids this year. The vice principal, a woman named Denise Kowalski, said it to me in the school office doorway, holding my career day registration form like it was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. Behind her, through the window, I could see the gym already filling with folding tables. A dentist, a firefighter, someone from the local news station setting up a small camera rig. "I'm not sure I understand," I said. "I registered 3 weeks ago. My daughter's been talking about it since." Denise glanced down the hallway before lowering her voice, the particular tone adults use when they think they're being diplomatic instead of insulting. Some of the other parents raised concerns about the military presence, given, the current climate around some of these issues. "We just want Career Day to feel welcoming for everyone." "I work in military logistics," I said. "I don't bring weapons to Career Day, Denise. I bring a supply chain map and a really good story about how we get bottled water to 40,000 people in under 6 hours. "I understand," she said, in the tone of someone who very much did not. "It's just, some families felt it might be a bit of a difficult influence for the younger kids, given everything going on in the news." I stood there for a second, holding my badge, my laminated ID, the folder of photos I'd printed the night before with my daughter Maya, sitting cross-legged on our living room floor, helping me pick which ones to bring. She was 8. She had asked me twice that week if I was going to wear my uniform. "I already told my daughter I'd be there," I said, "in front of her class." Denise's smile didn't move, but something behind it tightened. "I'm sure there are other ways to be involved. The PTA bake sale is always looking for—" That's when the front doors of the school opened behind me, and the noise in the lobby changed all at once. A ripple of whispers, a teacher's aide nearly dropping a stack of folders, Denise's expression sliding from polite dismissal into something closer to panic. I turned around. General Marcus Webb, 4 stars on each shoulder, was walking toward us in his dress uniform, flanked by 2 aides, looking exactly as unbothered as a man who has walked into rooms far more hostile than a suburban elementary school lobby. He stopped in front of me and saluted, crisp and formal, the way you salute someone whose rank you respect, regardless of the setting. "Colonel Reyes," he said, "ready for Career Day?" Denise Kowalski had gone very, very pale 2 weeks earlier. "My name is Elena Reyes. I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Army, 20 years of service, currently assigned to a logistics command responsible for coordinating disaster relief and humanitarian supply chains. The unglamorous, unphotographed side of military work that almost never makes the news, mostly because it looks, on paper, a lot like being extremely good at extremely large spreadsheets. I have a daughter, Maya, who was 8 that year, and, like most 8-year-olds, deeply invested in the idea of her mother having an interesting job to talk about at school. When the Career Day flyer came home in her backpack that September, she filled out my registration form herself, in handwriting that wandered slightly off the lines, and handed it to me with the particular seriousness only children bring to bureaucratic paperwork. "You have to wear your uniform," she told me. "Everyone's dad is coming in their work clothes. You should too." I want to be honest about something. I almost said no. Not because I was ashamed of my service. I have never once been ashamed of my service. But because I'd been in enough rooms over 20 years to have a fairly accurate sense of which ones would receive a woman in an Army uniform warmly, and which ones would receive her the way you receive an uninvited guest who happens to have RSVP'd correctly. Elementary schools, in my experience, could go either way, depending largely on the adults running them rather than the children in the room. I registered anyway. Maya's face when I told her settled the question for me more thoroughly than any risk assessment could have. The first sign of trouble came 10 days before Career Day, in the form of an email from Denise Kowalski that used the word diverse representation. So many times I had to read it twice to figure out what she was actually trying to tell me. Buried in the 3rd paragraph, after 2 paragraphs of praise for my willingness to participate, was the actual message. The school had received some feedback about the appropriateness of military presenters at an elementary Career Day, and they wanted to explore ways to present the material sensitively. I called the school. Denise wasn't available. I left a message. She didn't call back. I mentioned it to my husband David that night, mostly venting, the way you vent about something you assume will resolve itself once you actually get someone on the phone. You should push back on this now, he said, not the day of. I don't want to make it a fight, I told him. I don't want Maya walking into that gym in the middle of her mother's controversy. Elena, he said, she's already walking into it. The only question is whether you're standing there when it happens. I didn't call the school back that week. I told myself I was being reasonable, giving them room to sort it out on their own. Looking back, I think I was doing what I'd done for most of my career in rooms like that one, staying quiet, hoping competence would speak for itself before anyone got the chance to make it a confrontation. 5 days before career day, Maya came home from school upset in a way she rarely was. Not crying exactly, but quiet. The specific quiet of a child turning over something she doesn't fully have language for yet. Sophia's mom said something at pickup, she told me, sitting at the kitchen table, picking at the edge of her placemat. About you. What did she say? She said soldiers might scare the little kids. Maya looked up at me. Are you scary? I sat down across from her. I thought, for a moment, about all the ways I could soften that question into something easier. A joke, a redirect. The kind of deflection I'd gotten very good at over the years when civilians said things like that in front of me. I don't think so, I said instead. But I think some people have an idea of what a soldier is that doesn't match what I actually do. That happens sometimes. People decide who you are before they've asked you a single question about it. Are you going to still come? Yes, I said. I already told you I would. She nodded, satisfied in the direct, uncomplicated way children are satisfied by a promise kept, and went back to her homework. I sat at that table for a long time after she left the room, thinking about the difference between staying quiet to keep the peace and staying quiet because you've quietly decided the peace matters more than you do. That night, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in almost a year, General Marcus Webb, who I'd worked directly under during 2 deployments and who had, at my promotion ceremony 3 years earlier, told me to call him if I ever needed anything, in the specific tone senior officers use when they mean it and aren't just being polite. I hadn't planned to actually take him up on it. I called mostly to talk it through, the way you call someone with better judgment than your own when you're too close to a problem to see it clearly. They said what? He asked when I explained. That my service might be a difficult influence, that some families raised concerns about the current climate. There was a long pause on the line. Elena, he said, what climate exactly do they think we're currently in? I don't think they could tell you if you asked. He was quiet for another moment. What time is career day? Sir, I wasn't calling to ask you to do anything. I just needed to think out loud. I know, he said. What time is career day? I didn't ask him what he was planning. I've known Marcus Webb for 11 years, and I've learned that when he asks a logistical question in that particular tone, the plan is usually already made, and the conversation you're having is mostly a courtesy. 3 days before career day, Denise Kowalski finally called me back. Not to apologize, but to inform me, in the same carefully diplomatic language as her email, that they'd decided to streamline the presenter list, and that while they appreciated my willingness to participate, they'd found a wonderful representative from the local fire department who could speak more broadly to public service without, and I remember this phrase specifically because I wrote it down the moment I hung up, narrowing the conversation to any one particular type of service. Are you disinviting me? I asked her directly. We're just reshaping the format a bit, she said. I'm sure you understand. I don't, actually, I said. But I'll be there Thursday morning, as registered, with my daughter, who is in your school, and who asked me herself to come. If there's been an official decision to exclude me, I'd like that in writing, from the principal, with the specific reasoning documented. There was a long silence on the line. I'll have to check with Mr. Hendricks, she said. She never called back. I took the silence as tacit permission, or possibly as a decision to simply hope I wouldn't show up. Either way, I showed up. Thursday morning, I put on my dress uniform for the first time in almost a year. The last occasion had been a change of command ceremony, not a second-grade classroom. And drove Maya to school myself instead of letting her take the bus, mostly because I wanted the extra 20 minutes with her before whatever the morning turned into. "You look really nice," she told me in the car, studying my ribbons with the serious attention of a child cataloging something important. "What's this one for?" "I'll tell you at Career Day," I said. "That's part of my presentation." I checked in at the front office at 8:40, exactly on time, and that's where I found myself in the doorway with Denise Kowalski, holding my registration form like an eviction notice, delivering the something more relatable line that had been building in one form or another for 2 weeks. I want to be honest that I didn't know, in that moment, whether Marcus Webb was actually going to show up or whether our phone call had simply been a friend letting me vent to someone who understood the weight of it. I hadn't asked him to intervene. I genuinely didn't expect an intervention. Then the front doors opened. General Webb's salute in that lobby wasn't performative. It was exactly the salute he'd give me on any base, in any building, at any rank we both held. A gesture of respect that had nothing to do with the audience and everything to do with the person he was addressing. That's precisely what made it land the way it did. "Colonel Reyes," he said, "ready for Career Day?" "General," I said, returning it. "I wasn't expecting you, sir." "I had a scheduling gap," he said, which was, I would later learn, a fairly significant understatement of what he'd actually rearranged to be standing in that lobby. "Thought I'd stop by and see how the Army's doing at elementary school outreach these days." Denise Kowalski found her voice, eventually, in the strained, overcorrected register of someone realizing they'd made an assumption they were about to have to answer for. "General, I'm so sorry. I wasn't informed there would be. Is there something I can help you with?" "You can help me find the gym," he said pleasantly. "I understand there's a Career Day happening. I was told my colonel here might not be presenting after all, which struck me as an unusual decision, given her specialty is precisely the kind of large-scale humanitarian logistics work I'd think a school would want children learning about." "There was some concern," Denise started, "about, sensitivity around military topics given—" "Given what exactly?" General Webb asked. His tone remained entirely pleasant. That was, I'd learn later, watching Denise's face, somehow worse than if he'd been angry. Denise didn't have an answer that survived being asked directly. Very few of the reasons she'd given me over the past 2 weeks did. The principal, Mr. Hendricks, appeared within about 90 seconds of the front doors opening. Word travels fast in an elementary school, even among adults. And the conversation that followed was, by every account I heard from teachers afterward, the most efficient piece of school administration anyone had witnessed in years. "General Webb," Hendricks said, extending a hand that was noticeably less steady than his voice. "This is an honor, sir. I wasn't aware you'd be joining us." "Neither was I until this morning," Webb said. "I understand there was some confusion about Colonel Reyes's participation today." "We were just discussing the format," Hendricks said, glancing at Denise. "I'd like to understand the format then," Webb said. "Because as I understand it, you have a decorated officer with 2 decades of humanitarian logistics experience, willing to volunteer her time to speak with your students, and somewhere in the planning process, that got characterized as a difficult influence. I'd like to hear the reasoning behind that characterization, because from where I'm standing, it sounds like a decision made about a woman's career, without asking her a single substantive question about what that career actually involves." The lobby had gone very quiet by then. A cluster of parents dropping off kids had slowed near the door, not quite eavesdropping, not quite not. Hendricks looked at Denise. Denise looked at the floor. "I think there's been a miscommunication," Hendricks said finally. "Colonel Reyes is absolutely welcome to present today. I apologize for any confusion." "Good," Webb said. "I'd like to sit in, if that's permitted. I find I learn something new every time I hear Colonel Reyes explain how she gets clean water to 40,000 displaced people in under 6 hours. It's better logistics than most Fortune 500 companies manage on a good day." I presented third that morning, after the dentist, and before the local news anchor, in a gym full of folding chairs and second graders, who, as it turned out, could not have cared less about the current climate around some of these issues, and cared a great deal about whether I'd ever ridden in a helicopter, which I had, and whether I'd ever been scared, which I answered honestly, the same way I'd answered Maya's teacher years earlier when a similar question came up. Yes, sometimes. And being brave doesn't mean you aren't. It means doing the job anyway. Maya sat in the front row in her class's designated section, and when I held up a photograph of the water distribution operation I'd run during a hurricane response 2 years earlier, she raised her hand before anyone else in the room. "That's my mom," she told the class, unprompted, with the specific pride of an 8-year-old who has been waiting 2 weeks to say exactly that sentence out loud. "She's really good at her job." General Webb sat in a folding chair near the back for the entire presentation in full dress uniform, taking up considerably more visual real estate than the setting was built for, saying nothing, needing to say nothing. His presence had already done the only work it needed to do, which was to make sure the room understood, without ambiguity, exactly whose judgment was being trusted that morning. Denise Kowalski found me afterward, near the gym doors, while I was packing up my folder of photographs. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I let some parent complaints shape a decision I should have made based on your actual qualifications. That wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't fair to Maya." "Thank you for saying that," I told her. I meant it, though I also didn't rush to make it smaller than it was. "I'd ask that next year, if concerns come up, you bring them to the person they're actually about, instead of deciding on her behalf what she's allowed to be to your students." "I will," she said. "I promise." I believed her, mostly, in the way you believe someone who's just been publicly and thoroughly corrected in front of a 4-star general, a specific, motivating kind of sincerity that tends to hold, at least for a while. Maya found me a few minutes later, trailing General Webb, who she had apparently spent the last 10 minutes interrogating about helicopters with the same thoroughness she'd once applied to me. "Mom," she said, "the general said I can visit the base sometime and see a real one." "Did he?" I said, glancing at Webb, who had the particular look of a man who just committed himself to a promise he fully intended to keep. "With your permission, Colonel," he said, "I think this young lady has earned it." I think about that morning sometimes, not because of the general, though I'm grateful he came, but because of the 2 weeks before it, the quiet accumulation of a school administrator deciding, piece by piece, that my service was something to be managed rather than welcomed, without ever once asking me a direct question about what that service actually was. I've spent 20 years in rooms that made that same quiet decision about me, in smaller, less nameable ways than an elementary school career day. Most of them didn't resolve with a 4-star general walking through the door. Most of the time, the resolution has to come from somewhere quieter, from deciding, the way I finally decided that week, that staying silent to keep a room comfortable isn't actually keeping the peace. It's just letting someone else's discomfort write the terms of your presence. Maya still talks about that career day, not really about the general, though she brings that up too when it's useful. Mostly, she talks about standing up in a gym full of her classmates and telling them, unprompted, that her mom is really good at her job. That's the part I keep, not the vindication. The 8-year-old girl deciding on her own that the truth was worth saying out loud. If you've ever had someone decide who you are before they bothered to ask a single real question about it, I hope you remember that their comfort was never actually your responsibility. Sometimes the only thing required to change a room is one person willing to stay in it. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who's been underestimated by people who never took the time to actually know them. And if you'd like more stories about quiet service, hard-won respect, and showing up anyway, I'd be glad if you joined me again. The end.